Hello, and thanks for tuning into Town Meeting TV's ongoing general election coverage. This program is part of a series of programs that we're bringing you about candidates, ballot items, and issues in advance of general election, Tuesday, November 5th. Polls will be open all day, 7 to 7. You'll also get ballots mailed to you at home, and you can vote as soon as you get those ballots mailed or by going in to visit your clerk's office and asking. You can find this forum and other forums like it at cctv.org/general. You can also follow all of Town Meeting TV's programming on youtube.com/townmeetingtv. On tonight's program, we're going to hear from 3 candidates running for 2 separate seats. And it's not to be confusing. We have one candidate running for 1 seat, and we have 2 candidates running in a different district for 2 seats. And I'm joined today by Angela Arsenault from Chittenden 2, Angela Arsenault from Chittenden 2, Bridget Marie Burkhardt from Chittenden 8, and Erin Brady also from Chittenden 2. And we're going to start with opening statements and just ask you what qualifies you to run, and, or what inspires you to run, and tell us also what committee you sat on, and give us a little outline of your district. Sure. And we'll start with you, Erin.
Thank you. I'm honored to represent Williston for 4 years now. Representative Arsenault and I represent a bulk of Williston. A little bit of it got shaved off in the last redistricting process on the more rural side of town, but we do represent the bulk. In the last 4 years, we've made important progress on public safety. We've made historic investments in housing, childcare, climate resiliency, and I'm especially proud of the work we've done to support children and families, including a child tax credit and making universal meals in schools permanent, which is something I worked hard to get passed. I care deeply about the future of our community and our state, and for 4 years now, that has really stood out to me as the common value among legislators. We come, and it's what gives me hope about the process, despite all the challenges we face right now. We come from 150 people from all over the state and all kinds of backgrounds, under the Golden Dome for 5 months and many late nights in order to try to meet the moment and do better for the future. I'm especially passionate about strengthening our public institutions for children and families, from early childhood all the way to post-secondary education and training. I think they're the most important means we have to create healthy communities and a more equitable society in the future. And that core value inspired my decision to become a public school teacher. I'm in my 18th year in the classroom as a high school teacher, and serve as vice chair of the House Committee on Education, where I anticipate I will continue to serve.
Great, thanks. Angela.
Thank you so much. I love that Town Meeting TV does this. Just want to start with that. And yes, as Erin described, so Erin and I are in a 2-seat district serving the majority of Williston, and Bridget will talk about the portion of Williston that is in Chittenden 8. I currently, for the last 2 years, served on House Judiciary Committee. It is where I belong. I'm so happy to be there, and really, really hope that I anticipate I will be there again in the next session. You asked about what qualifies you or what experience qualifies one to serve in this role, and I think any life experience qualifies a person to serve in this role. There are some skills that might make the job a little bit easier for some people, but I think it's really important to note that we are a citizen legislature, and so you come as you are, and whatever experience you bring to the body is valuable. That said, I have 20 years plus of experience as a journalist, so it's been my job to ask questions and understand issues, and then share what I've learned through interviews and research. And that has served me really well in the last 2 years. I've also I've served on our school board in the Champlain Valley School District for 5.5 years. That really gave me some great experience, continues to give me great experience and insight into policymaking. So I'm excited to go back in January and continue working on a whole host of priorities that I know we'll have a lot of time to get into through the questions.
Great, thanks so much. And Bridget Burkhardt, this will be your first session, your you'll be a freshman legislator,
I will be a freshman
assuming that you
legislator.
win your uncontested seat. So
Hopefully
council-
there's no write-in campaign that I don't know about going on. So yes, hopefully I will join the legislature and become colleagues with these two ladies in January. So I am running for the legislature because there are some issues that are going to have big decisions that are going to need to be made about them in the next couple of years. And I'd really like to be part of those conversations. I come at this having been a school board member for 6 years in South Burlington. So I did 3 two-year terms. I did a year as chair, a little year plus a couple of months as chair. So deeply invested in education, both from that perspective. I also have 2 children who are still in the public education system. My husband's a professor, so we are definitely an education home, even though I am not an educator myself. And so that public service was something that I really enjoyed doing. In South Burlington for those 6 years. I took a little break to go work. My background in my work life is as a finance person. So I started in mainstream finance and investment banking and private equity, and then made a career shift sort of in the middle of my career to finance with a purpose. So community development finance, which really uses some of the same tools, but really is directed at making communities better or working on issues that are important to society as a whole. So a lot of that time was spent consulting to financial institutions in developing countries to sort of help make their systems stronger so they could help build wealth in those countries. And then back in the United States, working with businesses that have a positive impact on the world. So for example, in my most recent job, we invested in an opioid use disorder treatment company. Those are the kinds of things that I've had experience working with. And I will stop there because we'll talk more about my background and my views on things as we go forward. But thank you for having us. Yeah.
And if you have a dream committee that you could sit on, what would that be?
So I hope Brian doesn't cringe. My dream committee is education because that's sort of where I'm coming at this from. Brian Minier, who is one of my colleagues in South Burlington, who I served on the school board with, is doing a fantastic job on education. And so highly unlikely that's not even something I'm going to put on my choices. That being said, I'm interested in a lot of things. So housing, the environment, economic development are all interesting to me. My background fits, I think, very well with the money committees as well. And the truth is, I would like to be, quote unquote, in the room where it happens with regard to education funding. So that would lean toward Ways and Means. Again, I've heard a lot of people talk about it. That's not usually where freshmen end up, and that's okay if I don't. But that is sort of where I think I probably could add the most value right out of the gate.
So we're going to jump right into the money issues, property taxes and education. And Angela, we'll begin with you. This year, many Vermonters will see a double-digit increase in their property taxes, and nearly a third of school budgets failed on town meeting day. How will you approach education funding reform and property taxes for the coming fiscal year? Big topic.
Yeah, and certainly not one that we could answer completely in 90 seconds. But my first thought when I hear that question is to kind of take the word "you" out of it. I know I'm answering from my perspective, but there's no one person who can tackle this, and there's really the only way to do this is collaboratively, and that's how we're approaching it in my experience in the House, and I'm hoping for more collaboration between the House and Senate, and certainly between the General Assembly and the governor, because that has been lacking as well. So collaboratively is the one-word answer to the question. But to expand on that a little bit, I still believe that we have to focus on education delivery and not sacrifice the quality of education. We need access for every child. We need to be paying more attention to where our taxpayers' dollars are going. And I have a feeling Erin will speak to this as well, that we really need to watch all the different ways that the education fund is being overburdened, frankly. And for instance, public education dollars going to independent schools that do not comply with or follow the same rules as public schools, that's a problem. All of the social services that are being paid for out of the education fund, there was, I believe it was a $50 million increase in mental health supports and behavioral supports as far as costs based on FTE in our school districts in 1 year, just over the last year from FY 24 to 25. So that's just those are two examples of things we really need to pay more attention to and take a look at before we talk about the gigantic shift we need to make.
Who administers the ed fund? Who's making that decision?
Well,
Which decision? I guess that really depends.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to Bridget, and if somebody can wrap that up and just help inform viewers about that, that would be great. Bridget, property taxes and education, your thoughts?
And just to build on what Angela was saying, it's really, for me, it's two things that are really important. We have to hold them both in our heads at the same time. We need to make sure that we're getting what we want out of the education system, that we're getting the results that we want out of it. And that's been a concern that I've heard from folks in South Burlington, especially sitting on the school board, that maybe we're not getting the results that we want. So that's one piece of it. And is there a way to deliver education that can get better results for more kids across a bigger range of backgrounds and kids who are in our system. And then there's the whole funding piece. And that is a very complex problem that I'm not going to be able to solve in 90 seconds. But one of the things that we can do, a couple of things we can do, one is to focus on the drivers that are increasing those costs. So this is just one example. There are many others, that healthcare costs are a driver of rising education costs. And so doing something like what the state auditor has recommended, which is reference-based pricing for healthcare, to try to bring down healthcare costs, which would bring down benefits costs in the healthcare system as well as the state administrative system as a whole. We need to look at, are there efficiencies that we're missing in how we're delivering education? So for example, is the way we've structured special education the best way to meet kids' needs? And is it the best way from an efficiency perspective? And is there a third way that would benefit kids more and perhaps be more efficient cost-wise? And I think that there will need to be some more discussion, as Angela said, about things that have been loaded into the education fund that weren't previously paid through the education fund. And I think that those services, most of them are appropriately delivered at school. That's the biggest touch point that we have with kids, and that's where they should receive those services. But whether that means that those services should compete for dollars with all the other things that the education system is trying to deliver, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. So
Thank you. And Erin.
I'm going to start with something that I've written in my notes. Every time this comes up from an editorial from Emerson Lynn in the St. Albans Messenger, it's complicated, it's controversial, it's expensive, and that's what a good educational system is. It's all of that and more, because it's the most vital thing a state offers its citizens. It's how we build for the future. So I think we have to, I'd agree with people on both sides of me here, we have to keep in mind that we're talking about a system full of humans here, children and staff. And in our public discourse around the education fund, I worry that we lose sight of the fact that our schools are thriving in many ways. And in most things, the things that all the good things typically aren't reported in journalism. That's just not how the industry is wired. But it's not as if our schools are in some state of utter decline. Our schools are doing quite well. There's always room for improvement, and the structural issues behind our system and the finances are incredibly challenging. And we definitely saw that this past year. And this is really nothing new. In many ways, we're sort of exactly where we were 10 years ago. But having record number of budget failures is not good for schools. It is not good for the people in schools. It's not good for community health and stability. And we certainly need to get to a better place and a tax rate that Vermonters can afford. I feel it as a homeowner. My friends and neighbors do as well, and know that the rate of increase is unsustainable right now. So we have, as Bridget was saying, certainly we need to work towards some efficiencies within the system. That we have this really difficult inherent challenge in our system, and that we have statewide control of the education fund, yet the spending decisions and most decisions are made locally, with a big asterisk, made locally, except they can't control healthcare costs. They can't control that we decided to do universal meals. So there's this real tension between the state and local control piece that has been, this is nothing new, but has perhaps reached a new level of tension. And we spent most of the last session, the Education Committee had witnesses. I think we totaled up like 119 witnesses in the end, from every facet of education to come in and tell us what is the problem when it comes to the structure and the funding, and what do we do? And there are a lot of hard decisions to be made in terms of efficiencies and changes that might need to come in the system. Who gets to make the decisions? How many buildings, the footprint of our system, how many buildings can we sustain? What is a healthy size classroom and good for learning? As Representative Arsenault said, who's in our system? Do our public dollars go to public schools? Are they leaving the public system? Are they leaving the state and country? A lot of really difficult decisions that we are going to have to make as a state in the very near term.
You're working on a study committee right now that's around ed funding. Tell us just a little bit.
It's around the specific issue of school construction, and we have compounding issues in education. We have not had any state aid for facilities since 2007, and we've got a thorough inventory that shows almost $1 billion of backlog in school facility needs. Obviously, there is not money to do that level of work right now, but we have buildings that couldn't open this year because of health and safety issues, and so we have to start to get our hands around that. So the group I'm working on is just looking at that issue, and if it's statewide dollars, though we pay into them locally, if they're statewide dollars, what are our statewide priorities for our system? So when we're investing in the physical infrastructure, we're following our statewide priorities. So it's only one piece of it. It is one of the drivers of increased spending this year. The facilities needs are dire.
Thanks. And I am aware that we are glossing over really big issues, and I really appreciate you all just giving the voters a little sense of how you stand on a variety of these issues. So we're going to move on to housing, and we have two questions here actually that address housing and emergency shelter. And I'm going to start, I'm just going to read the question on housing, but I want to acknowledge that long-term housing is different than meeting the short-term needs of people. You know, I think people have heard a lot about folks who are on the street because of the closing of the hotel program, and euphemistically camping. I mean, I don't think anybody's camping. I think people are living outside, and it's getting cold. But this past session, Democrats in the House proposed spending an additional $100 million per year for 10 years on publicly subsidized affordable housing. This level of investment was not passed in the Senate. Would you support this level of public investment in housing? And then if you also want to address emergency housing in your answer, that would be great. And we're going to actually start, I think, with you, Bridget, on this, our freshman senator, our representative.
It's unconscionable to me that there are 400 or 500 children that are being kicked out of hotel motels right now and are potentially camping or sleeping outside with their families, because that has so many follow-on effects. They are not getting education. You know, they are not able to be transported to school because the school system can't find them with the bus. They don't know where they are. Their parents often don't have transportation to get them there. That is creating childhood trauma that's going to carry with them when they are back in the school system. It's meaning they're not getting any of these other social services that we were talking about that are provided in the schools. So we need to figure out a better emergency shelter system so that if and when something like this happens, there is some place for people to go. I don't know the right level of spending. I don't know if $100 million a year is the right level because I'm not steeped enough in the data. That's one of the things I'm an analytical data person, and I don't like to speak about data until I really have my hands around it. I'm trying to go to a housing conference in November that's going to be hosted, luckily, in South Burlington to try to learn more about it. But my understanding is that the Senate really chose to focus on removing some obstacles with regard to regulation to building new housing, as opposed to spending a lot of money to subsidize the building of affordable housing, which is one of the prongs that is going to need to be done to address the affordable housing issue. And I'm firmly of the belief we're going to have to, having worked on a very big potential school construction project that didn't go through in South Burlington, I understand how quickly construction costs rise and how expensive it really is to build housing. And I think that it's not going to make economic sense for developers to develop affordable housing unless there is some pretty significant state aid to subsidize the building of that housing. And without more housing, I don't think we're going to solve the problem. I'll end it there because there are people who know much more about it in the room with me. So I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. Erin, were you one of the Democrats that voted to on this additional spending? What are your feelings for this upcoming session?
I did vote for it, and though I'm a sitting legislator, this is one of the challenges of a citizen legislature is that we are generalists in everything with no staff in there part-time. So, we're doing the best that we can, making decisions based on our values and the feedback in our community. And there's no doubt housing is touching all parts of our state right now in terms of needs and the impact of having such a shortage of affordable housing. It reaches into education, to healthcare. There's so much interconnectivity between them. We have to continue to invest in housing. As Bridget was saying, affordable housing is just not viable for a lot of builders at this point, given the shrinking workforce, given the price of materials. I think we have to continue to do what we did last year and ease up on some of our regulations. I appreciate, the balance Vermont has had between environmental conservation and development regulations, but we also have to be honest with ourselves that, as if the more that we fence off large parts of the state, that comes with a cost. And I think there's some real cultural attitudes that can serve as a challenge at times to housing. And I've been met with it certainly as I talk with folks in the community that housing, it seems everyone is interested in more housing. And then when it's going to be in my backyard, the feeling changes. And, I live in a single family house myself, so I'm part of, quote unquote, the problem there, and that our pattern of settlement may not be sustainable for the future growth needs of Vermont, but we are going to have to face a pretty big shift in housing and building more housing and doing more dense housing. And having more economic diversity in the types of housing and where it is, and not just concentrating it in a few communities. So I don't know this time around if I would vote for the same bill. I think, that we're in a little bit different economic situation, and I think we need to really look at multiple issues, healthcare, housing, and education, and be more strategic about where do we make the investments and where do we make regulatory or policy changes towards a more sustainable future.
Thank you. Angela.
So the bill that you referenced, I believe that in the original question, I believe that's referencing House Bill 829. Mm-hmm. You're like, sure, that sounds right. And the thing that I really, really like about that bill is that it was a plan. And it was a plan with funding. The Ways and Means worked to find funding for this housing plan, which we need. We all know that. And it was frustrating to see that the Senate and certainly the governor and his administration could not get behind a plan that, yes, will cost money, but guess what? It costs money to build housing. And we know the numbers, we know how many housing units we need over this amount of time. And that bill did just that, and it was funded through the proposed marginal tax on income over $500,000. And so I believe in that model. I think it's really unfortunate that that bill did not pass the Senate.
And primarily didn't pass because people didn't want that new tax.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And, we hear from the governor a lot, no new taxes, but he's also talking about a housing problem that we all see every single day. And it's just hard to understand how anyone can acknowledge the problem and name the problem over and over again and not offer a solution and not admit that it's going to cost money. I understand, we have to be mindful of what we ask for, and as Erin's saying, what we prioritize. That's incredibly important. But housing is healthcare, it's mental health care, it's substance abuse prevention and care. Housing is public safety. It is foundational to all of these other issues. If we're not investing there, what are we doing?
Okay, thanks. We're going to move on to public safety. Public safety is a top priority for many voters, and I will say that this question does not talk about mental health. It does not talk about addiction. It's talking about the criminal justice system. And so I just want to put that out there. This past session, lawmakers increased judicial staff, increased retail theft penalties, and expanded restorative justice practices in Vermont. What more needs to be done by the legislature to advance public safety and repair Vermont's criminal justice system? And we're going to start with you, Erin, on this question.
I think I'd pick up right where Representative Arsenault left off, that there's not only do we have to make decisions about investments and priorities, but there is a cost to inaction. There's a cost to not funding certain things, and we are seeing the cost to not funding our judiciary, to not funding basic functions of government. And as the gears grind down and they're unable to process cases, we lose an entire part of that system and accountability. And so
What is the backlog of case? I mean, is there
I would actually love to let
Okay.
Angela
Well,
speak to that, because it's her committee's
Okay.
jurisdiction and they were
Yeah,
steeped
Erin,
in it. But it's a pretty profound backlog. And so if the cases cannot move through the system and we don't have just the basic personnel, that has a tremendous impact on all aspects of public safety. So I support the actions. The Judiciary Committee has been really thoughtful in how are we going to get out of this backlog, and government has to function. And so at a certain point, some things may sound like new taxes, but really, if we aren't actually maintaining the things we have, we're costing ourselves more in the long run. Certainly, right now, school facilities are a liability for our state. The same is true of many systems in the state, and certainly, as Angela was saying, housing is so essential to our health and well-being and for all Vermonters. And so if we're not investing there, then we will continue to see higher needs in schools. We will continue to see higher needs, higher rates in the criminal justice system, and things that are reactionary and more expensive. But I certainly would let Angela speak more to the backlog and the need to simply employ people to do the work of the justice system so that it operates on a predictable scale.
This question doesn't really talk about, there's a women's prison proposed to be built in Essex Junction or Essex, it's in that little corner.
Yeah.
And then of course, there's the discussion of this prison in Springfield, but where do you all stand on that, I guess? Just follow up, Erin, and then we'll keep.
I think the current state of the women's facility is atrocious, and so that's something that we have to address as a state. And we also have a desperate need for juvenile services, and we're sending juveniles out of state to places that may be incredibly unsafe. It was just in the news again, and more expensive. And so many of the same things Bridget said about like education and special education, if we can do things at scale here at home, we are likely here in Vermont to do a better job, keep people more connected to their communities, and keep the dollars that we're using in these public systems within our state.
Yeah, great. Angela.
Ooh, okay, where to start? So I don't recall right now the current number of cases sitting in the court backlog, but it is thousands of cases.
This goes back pre-COVID.
It does, yep. It started before the pandemic. That certainly exacerbated the issue, and but what we're interested in now, certainly, we did a lot of work last session to address the backlog, so we want to give it some time. I think the question asked specifically, what should the legislature do?
Exactly.
And the thing for us to do this upcoming session is to really see if what we did works. And to be thinking toward the future. So you mentioned the women's facility. That is really in the Corrections and Institutions Committee, but I'm also co-chair of the Women's Caucus, and the Women's Caucus has been following this issue very closely. There's some controversy around or discussion around the size of the facility. What's the right bed count? As well, that's true for the juvenile facility. And it's an uncomfortable conversation for folks to have sometimes, because we may not be able to imagine a society without prisons, but we really do need to broaden our thinking and imagine a society that cares for most of its members in community. And so really bolstering community resources rather than warehousing people, which is a terrible term, but when you think about prisons, it's excluding people from the community. And sometimes there is a need for that in some cases. Some crimes are so severe that there is a need. But we all do better, communities do better, the population, the folks who are in, being cared for by Department of Corrections do better when they're served in their communities. I also want to say domestic and sexual violence is a focus of our committee, and we can't talk about public safety without talking about especially domestic violence. Last December, I remember a snapshot, state data showing that 40% of calls to law enforcement for crimes involving violence involved domestic violence. And so we work on a lot of different bills in our committee to address the safety of victims. I would love to see us work more in prevention, and that again gets to what we've all been talking about as far as the upstream preventative measures that are that cost money, but are such a wise investment when you look at what things cost downstream to take care of. The judiciary, everything going through the courts is a result of missed opportunities along the way. Somewhere along the way, we've missed a chance to intervene and help a person who needed help, and now they're committing crimes.
Thanks. Bridget, on this question to you.
I have very little to add to that very thoughtful analysis, but there is sort of a theme running through a lot of this, which is it's where does the work lie, and which committee, and how do those committees work together? And that's something I'm looking forward to learning. But as you're talking about, a lot of that work would happen in other committees, Education Committee, Healthcare Committee, Human Services Committee, and how those really do their work and how that connects with what's happening in the Judiciary Committee. So yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to my very erudite colleagues.
We're going to do we're going to do a lightning round of questions, but before we do that, I do want to touch on healthcare. You mentioned it was one of the primary drivers in rising school budgets, and of course in all of our budgets. So short thing that the state or that you're hoping to work on in the legislature, or you're hoping to hear happen in the legislature to reduce the cost of healthcare and meet healthcare needs of every Vermonter. And we're going to start with you, Angela, on this question.
Well, I think many of your viewers will be aware of the rather large report that just came out, the Oliver Wyman report. One of the things that is explicitly called out in that report is a need for freestanding birth centers in Vermont. We are one of only a couple of states in the country that do not allow freestanding birth centers. It is illegal in Vermont. This is preposterous, and this is again an issue that the Women's Caucus is working on. Myself and Representative Ella Chapin, my co-chair, really working to move this forward, hopefully this session. It is in the report. It is identified as a resource that would actually lower healthcare costs in the state, and it gives women choice.
So this is a bill that you may be part of introducing, or is it already?
Okay, part of introducing, definitely.
Great. Bridget?
This is a very sort of small aspect of it, but something that's very important to me in reducing healthcare costs is support for more general practitioners, attracting them, retaining them, keeping them in Vermont. That's been just a personal issue in our house with the rotating cast of GPs, both for my husband and myself and my mother. And that really, your care really drops off, and you end up with a lot more long-term problems if you don't have a solid relationship over the long term with the GP. And so I would really like to see us do whatever we need to do at the state level to try to attract more and retain more. And if we're talking about a wealth tax, I would think that we would want to try to carve out that segment of our important workforce, that being sort of general practitioners and healthcare professionals that we really need more of in the state of Vermont.
You would like to exclude them from
I would like to
tax?
I would like to exclude them from that as a way of making sure that they can come here and stay here and not feel like they need
Thanks
to go
for that
someplace else.
specific. Right, Nate?
Healthcare is certainly challenging, and particularly many similarities to the challenges in education, but coupled with that, vast majority of Vermonters get their health care either through Medicare, which is administered by the federal government, or through their employers. So in some ways, state policy has less opportunity to really be the driver of change here the way it might in education. And that's frustrating. And certainly we need federal action towards a quality healthcare system that is a right for all Americans. I'm interested particularly in our healthcare workforce and appreciate the work we've done to create some new loan forgiveness programs for nurses. Certainly anything we can do to have a more homegrown workforce and not traveling nurses, that adds extraordinary expense to hospital budgets. And it's also tied to the housing issue we've been talking about. A major part of attracting and keeping people is that we've got to grow our housing stock so that people have a place to live in our healthcare workforce.
Thank you. So there's a quick lightning round, and we'll start with you, Bridget, and then we're going to rotate around. Should private schools be funded with public dollars?
Only if the private schools follow the same rules that public schools do, so essentially function as public schools.
No, unless designated under some sort of statute to function as a public school.
No.
I am on the designation train. Yep.
Yep, got it. Do you support raising the age of family court jurisdiction?
Potentially, yep.
100%.
Okay.
Brain science supports it.
And that is raising the age to 19 at this point?
In April of 2025, it will rise to 19.
Yep,
Yes.
got it. Great, thanks, Bridget.
Yes, I 100%.
Great. Should biomass play a role in emissions reduction strategies?
I don't know.
Burning wood.
Yeah, I am not sure. This is an area that I need to learn more about. I have constituents who are very helpful in this area and do not support biomass.
Got it. Bridget?
I too am still learning. My understanding is that biomass is done using waste materials and not using giant fields or forests that are grown specifically for that purpose, that it can play a role, but it should be a short-term role as opposed to a long-term role.
And Erin?
Pretty much mirror what Bridget said. Yeah.
Do you support a statewide ban on assault weapons? Angela?
Yes.
Okay. Bridget?
I do, with the caveat that the Supreme Court is going to say a lot about this at the national level in the next year, so it might not be the right time for us to spend an incredible amount of resources and time worrying about it at the state level. We might need to wait and see what happens at the federal level so that we're not in conflict.
But if it comes to you?
If it came to me, I would say yes, ban assault weapons.
Great.
Yes,
Erin? Great.
yes, bans.
Should legislators be paid more? Angela?
Yes.
Yes, so that more people can go be legislators and we can get a broader view of perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Do you support banning or limiting student cell phone use in schools? Bridget?
Absolutely. We're doing it in South Burlington, and it's successful for the first few months that we've tried it, and it's really helping the learning environment a lot. Yeah.
Erin?
Yes, but as a high school teacher, the devil is in the details, and it is absolutely extremely challenging. So I think we have to be really clear about what the parameters are, and I want to make sure that we aren't putting the cost of 100,000 yonder pouches on the education fund and on property taxpayers. If Verizon wants to pay for them, great, but
That could come out of a
yes,
out of a
but-
tax on.
yes, yes.
And Angela?
Yes.
Banning?
Yes, I support it 100% banning phones, student use of cell phones during school, and I will be introducing legislation.
Great.
Hopefully with Erin, if I can get to the right details.
Bridget, where do you get your news? And this is not a, we don't want you to say town meeting TV. You can. Yeah. That's not why this is here. Where do you get your news, Bridget?
I get my national news from the New York Times primarily, but I read a lot of Vermont Digger. I listen to VPR, 7 Days. I get a lot of links from Front Porch Forum and just what other people in the community are looking at. And then, of course, the other paper and the Williston Observer, both of them. So.
Erin?
Almost exactly the same. The New York Times for national, local, it's a mix between Digger and VPR in 7 Days. WCIX usually around the dinner hour, and then the Observer on Thursdays.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and I'll add so all of that, and I really like the Washington Post as well. The New York Times and Washington Post and NPR for national news, and then Digger, 7 Days. Some of our local TV stations do a great job, and I love that our town has a newspaper. It's really rare, and they do a wonderful job.
Erin, do you ride the bus?
I do not currently, no.
I don't, but my 16-year-old does a whole lot, and it's an incredible service.
Yeah.
No, but I wish there were service to my neighborhood so that I could. I grew up riding the bus a lot and used it to get to high school, and wish that my kids could do the same. Yeah.
Great. And then the fun question, Angela, what's your favorite ice cream in Vermont?
Oh, it's a toss-up between a maple creamy. It doesn't really, almost doesn't matter where. They're good everywhere. And moose tracks with hot fudge.
Bridget?
I love it all. Cherry Garcia, if you're talking about ice cream. If you're talking about creamies, my favorite is Palmer Lane maple creamy.
Great.
Maple creamy at the Maple Barn at the fair.
There you go. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to give you 30 seconds just to go out and say, I'm like wondering my mic is dragging on me. If you could just tell folks how to get in touch with you. Angela.
Oh, sure. You can find me on the internet, Angela for Williston, angelaforwilliston.com. Email is a great way to get in touch. There's an email contact form on my website, as well as our legislative email address, which is a little long, but it's arsenault@leg.state.vt.us.
And you can find that at the Vermont Legislature webpage.
Yep.
So you
Yep.
can put in your
Just go to the General Assembly website, and you can get all of our contact information. I have a phone number on there as well for calling or texting. I'm a big texter, so feel free.
Great, awesome, good to know. Bridget.
I also have a very, very basic website, burkhartforvt.com, www.burkhartforvt.com. You can't get there without the www for some reason. I am very technologically inept in that regard. And burkhartforvt@gmail.com. Those are the easiest ways, and I'm usually pretty responsive, so that's how to find me.
Thanks.
Similar, my campaign website is erinbradyforwilliston.com. The email, I believe, it's on the website, but contact@erinbradyforwilliston.com. Certainly strive to be accessible, transparent, and responsive. That's been a real priority for me as a representative. Representative Arsenault and I write monthly updates that are pretty lengthy during the session and really try to keep the community informed of what's happening in Montpelier and make ourselves available for community conversations throughout the session, and look forward to continuing to have that kind of access and contact with the community.
Great, thanks so much. And thank you all for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's ongoing coverage of local candidates, local budgets, and ballot items. Again, if you want to watch this forum again, if you're just tuning in to the end, you can find this and other programming at cctv.org/general or on youtube.com/townmeetingtv. Don't forget to vote on or before November 5th. And you can tune in that night to our local election results show, where we will be bringing you both results from Chittenden County, and also we'll be tuning in a little bit to the national election as well. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned.